strength and conditioning is a personal responsibility. It is up to you, not the club, because let's face the reality, for most of you rugby players that are going to be watching this, you maybe train once, twice a week for 60 to 90 minute tops, and that is simply not enough time to be able to balance the technical, the tactical, and the physical preparation needed for you to be able to build a robust conditioning engine. You need to realize that if you're not doing conditioning work outside your pitch sessions, you are going to be holding not only yourself back, but the team. In this video today, I'm going to be breaking down exactly how to build an 80-minute engine and why most conditioning plans are incomplete. You're going to want to stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to give you a framework that will completely change the way that you think about building fitness for rugby forever. So how do we go about building a complete engine? Well, my buddy Dan Reeve has come up with an excellent analogy, and he's a bit of a goat when it comes to building an engine. He has completed a Decker Ironman. Now, if you don't know what that is, just know that it is one of the most tremendous feats of endurance. It requires a massive engine. So we're going to walk through his analogy and how it applies to rugby players, right? So the first floor of your house is what we're going to call your resting heart rate. Now, this is going to be what your heart does at rest, and it signifies a global level of fitness for yourself. Then the next floor of this house, I want us to call your aerobic threshold. Now, this is going to be the intensity of exercise where you can still utilize oxygen throughout, and it means how fit you are. And this is super valuable for rugby players purely because rugby is an 80-minute game. Yes, there is a need for short, sharp, high-intense bursts of activity, but if you cannot sustain that for the 80-minute game, guess what? You are going to be useless as a rugby player. This aerobic threshold is going to be the foundation to what is going to help you last 80 minutes. Now, the next floor of this house, we're going to call your lactate threshold. Now, this is at the point which exercise becomes more intense and you're utilizing energy that you can't quite pay back. Think about those games where that ball doesn't go into touch for a while and you're sustaining high levels of effort for a long period of time. Maybe it's the kick chase battle. Your legs start feeling like lead and you don't necessarily want to move. And then the final thing to put some finishing touches on this masterpiece is the roof. Now, the roof is going to be your max heart rate, and that is simply the peak level of exertion that you can output at any one given point in time. So here is the finished masterpiece and the drawing of the house. But this is the issue that most rugby players face. They spend so much time trying to improve the height of the ceiling, but you will realize that there is limited space as to where you can go with that. There is very little improvements that you can make in max heart rate, which means this lactate threshold number has limited distance in what it can actually do for your performance. But if you flip the script, which is what we're going to teach you to do in this video, you can then lower your maximum heart rate. You can then increase your aerobic threshold to a point where you have this massive house that isn't going to be limited by your aerobic capacity. And if you think about conditioning this way, what that does is it massively increases the distance between your max heart rate and your resting heart rate, which is one of the key indicators of whether you can tolerate the 80-minute demands of a game of rugby. And now we'll get into exactly how you can do this so you can start writing better conditioning programs to get you fit. Tip number one for building an 80-minute engine is pretty simple, and that is the best conditioning program can sometimes be a nutrition intervention. I hate to break it to you, every kilo of body fat that you are carrying around that doesn't add to your performance puts extra strain on your cardiovascular system and makes everything else harder. Every single tackle, every single kick chase, every single minute that you spend on the pitch is hindered if you are carrying around unnecessary body fat. And I have seen it time and time again. We work with athletes through the off season where they do very little conditioning work, but they drop 8 to 10 kilos of body fat, improve their body composition, and suddenly they can run further, faster, for longer, which is the goal of any conditioning program. So sometimes we don't need to dive into the complex conditioning protocols, and sometimes we just need to put better food into our body, get into a calorie deficit, and reduce body fat. And if you're struggling with that, we create a video called 7 Habits to Drop Your Next 7% of Body Fat, which runs through the exact steps that I wish I knew when I first started. And if you're in that camp, I know for a fact it will help your conditioning massively, which means we can get into step 2 and you can get more out of your conditioning training. Let's go. So while following tip number 1 is going to reduce your body fat percentage, what you may notice is a reduction in resting heart rate, which is perfect because we're increasing the distance from the floor to the ceiling. The next step is going to be building your aerobic base, which is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to further reduce that resting heart rate. You are going to get fitter. Some of the elite endurance cyclists drop their resting heart rate to roughly 30 beats per minute, which is absolutely wild. They're pretty much dead. But the other thing that it's going to do is going to improve your ability to handle higher intensity of exercises while staying aerobic, which is a massive improvement. So here's how you're going to do it. So when it comes to building that aerobic base, what you're going to need to do is a lot of work, sadly. This is a quality that requires you to work for a continuous duration for a long period of time. And more often than not, the more volume that you do here, the fitter that you get, which is why we tend to opt for an off-feet variation for our athletes. Because if you're trying to put 40, 50, 60 minutes in a single session, but you're doing that through a run and you're maybe 100 kilos plus, that is a lot of stress that you're going to be putting through the joints at any one given time. So I've stolen this method from Pete Burridge, who's done it with the Bristol Bears, and they tend to be pretty fit for pro rugby players, and that is going to be 4 minutes on, 1 minute off. And you're going to work through 6, 8, 10 rounds. You are going to creep up to doing massive amounts of work, and you are going to push really, really, really fucking hard. We're not going to worry too much about staying at zone 2. Zone 2 is a magical place for endurance athletes that are clocking up 30, 40, 50 hours of on-feet running a week. So they need a way to keep their intensity down. But for you rugby players that are strapped into a bit of machine, I hate to break it to you, for those 4 minutes, I want you going flat out. So now you're doing your maybe 1, 2 off-feet sessions a week. You're clocking up 90 minutes of that aerobic activity. The next step for you is to start to improve your lactate threshold. Now, we do this through things like mass intervals, but what you need to realize is a lot of your sport training is actually going to be found in this middle ground where you're working at high intensities but with insufficient rest periods. So we need to be sparing here, and one of the methods that we like to use are mass intervals. Now, mass simply stands for maximal aerobic speed, and it is something that you're going to need to know if you want to design highly effective conditioning programs, because mass allows you to individualize your training to get the desired response. You've probably seen it at your club. You've got your tight head prop running with your fullback, and next thing you know, he's left in the dirt, getting a complete different stimulus response than the guy who's coasting at the front, finding it really easy. So you need to make sure that you've got an accurate way of prescribing that. So here's what I want you to do. Complete a Bronco, or use your best Bronco. Head to the description, download the calculator, input your score, and it will give you a mass number. And this is going to allow you to design how far you need to run on this next block, because you are going to be performing once a week 4 sets of 8 reps, 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off at 120% of your mass. So if you've got a mass score of 4, you are then going to be running for 60 meters throughout this period of time, and you're then going to keep to that structure throughout this session. Now, here's the magic in the system. Because you've spent the time building your aerobic base, developing that fitness off feet, you can actually get more from these, because you can recover faster between reps and you can recover faster between sets. And what that means is you can develop your running mechanics. Because you're going to be moving at a speed, you're going to be improving your fitness that is specific to running, which allows you to get more from your technical and tactical work that the team are asking you to do, because you're not falling apart and your joints can tolerate the 9, 10, 11K sessions they decide to slog you with. So that's 2. Now, the final thing left to improve on this is what we call your maximum heart rate. And I'll be honest, this is something that I've changed my mind on pretty recently. And this is going to be through your mental toughness training. Now, I've made many a meme slagging off mental toughness training, and I will add the caveat that this is the cherry on top of the cake. This is going to be one of the things that has very, very little return for your investment, but for some people, it can actually change the game. Because one thing I've realized training for this sub 5 minute mile is there is a subjective skill that you need to learn to be able to push to very, very, very high heart rates and sustain that for as long as you can. And sometimes, myself admittedly, don't have it between the ears to be able to go to that place. So sometimes you need to be able to go to the well, stay there, to realize what that actually feels like and what your body is capable of. So sprinkle these in very, very sparingly, and I would only use these for athletes that you would look at and say are soft. And if that resonates with you, some mental toughness training may actually do wonders for your conditioning, because if you realize you can push at this level, it means that anything else below that becomes a little bit easier too. So sometimes you need to go to that place. So the third tip to build in a conditioning base that lasts 80 minutes is to improve your speed reserve. Now, what does this mean? Well, I'm going to give you an example to walk through this. Athlete A has a top speed of 10 meters per second. Athlete B has a top speed of 8.5 meters per second. And this line represents game speed, being 7 meters per second. Now, game speed is the speed in which the game is conventionally played, okay? Now, what you need to realize that if this athlete needs to work at 7 meters per second, he needs to work at 80% of his top speed. This athlete, however, needs to work at 70% of his top speed. So if you're going to be working at 80% versus 70%, you're going to see who has the game easier. And the reason why that helps with your conditioning is when you're faster, the game feels slower. So you don't need to work as hard, and you don't need to work as hard for as long, which means you'll be able to do more work throughout the period of that game. And this is something that is often neglected by rugby players. So here's what I want you to do. I want 2 to 3 sprint top-ups every single week. Now, if you're in season, you can go for a microdose of 3 little efforts across the course of the week. If you're out of season or you're a player that's not getting many minutes, 2 bigger sessions can be ideal. And you're going to be working between kind of 10 to 30 meters, and you're going to be following 1 to 8, 1 to 10 work to rest ratios. Now, what that means is whatever time it takes you to complete a 30-meter sprint, you're going to rest 10 times that. So this work will feel very, very easy. There will be long periods of rest, but think about this like the strength work for the conditioning world. You need to output high forces, and to be able to do that, you need to minimize the presence of fatigue with these long rest periods. And that, for me, is exactly how we can tolerate and build an 80-minute engine. So how do you put it together in a training week? Well, if you're a rugby player that has a conditioning emphasis, and what we mean by that is that that's going to be your primary KPI for a training block, and you're going to drive the most volume and intensity to this quality, here's how I would do it. On a Monday, you would do your off-feet stuff. This is going to be that 4 minute on, 1 minute off for X amount of reps. On a Tuesday, this is going to be where you have your rugby training. Now, this is normally going to be the hardest team training session of the week, where you're going to be picking up those kind of medium to hard effort intervals, right? On a Wednesday, you have 2 choices depending on your recovery capacity and how much you get done here. You can rest, or you can do another one of these 4 minute on, 1 minute off sessions. Thursday, we're going to be doing our rugby training, and this is going to be a perfect opportunity, I would say, to get a speed top up in. Now, you can do this before training, arrive 10 to 15 minutes before, get a micro dose of that speed. Friday, we will take off because on Saturday, we are going to go into the furnace, and this is going to be where you do your hard effort conditioning and speed session. Now, this is going to be a bit more of an extensive speed session compared to this one. And remember, we want to do your speed before your conditioning, because we know that the fatigue that you build up through this is going to absolutely kill this speed session. So we want to make sure that we get that first so you can get the most out of it. Sunday, you can take off, maybe blast some arms, because we all feel better after training a little bit of biceps. But this is the complete recipe alongside a good nutrition intervention that I feel will allow you to step up your conditioning and make sure that you can tolerate the demands of an 80-minute game. So this is the complete system to building an engine. And if you want the complete system to building your best season yet, watch this video, because we run through the exact steps that we take with our athletes that allow them to step up, and I know they can for you too.